Hey, what is up, brother? So, I finally got to go to the theater to watch Marvel's Eternals, which was one of my most anticipated movies of the year. And I got shit to say. This movie was very strange, and not necessarily in a good way. When I saw the first reviews come in and the way people were reacting before the movie even came out, I got nervous pretty quickly. I said on Twitter that I thought this movie was going to be the last Jedi of the MCU, and so far, it seems like I was right. People are like really split on this movie, and everyone is like yelling at each other online, and it's really weird. And it's not that I want to add fuel to that fire, but Eternals has been eating my brain ever since I first saw it, and I want to explain why this movie didn't quite work for me. I went into this film expecting to love it, but my feelings about it have been incredibly mixed, and I don't think I'm alone in this. I think there's a reason why this movie divides audiences so much. It's not a coincidence. Now, immediately, I gotta call myself out. My expectations for Eternals were high. Very, very high. And for good reason. It has an all-star cast including Gemma Chan, Angelina Jolie, Kit Harington, Kumail Nanjiani, Salma Hayek, Richard Madden. It was directed by Chloe Zhao, who is a fucking genius. The trailers look beautiful. Kevin Feige was going around telling people he thought the movie could be a Best Picture contender for the Oscars. Like, it seemed like this movie was just going to hit different, and I expected a lot from it. And on the one hand, it is hitting different. This is by far the most different Marvel movie in a while. So it confuses me because in concept, I really like Eternals. The movie looks pretty, there are some amazing shots in it, the actors are all doing a good job, and I don't hate the story it's trying to tell. So why is it that the more I think about this movie, the less I like it? Well, I went to see the movie a second time, and I think I figured it out now. And I'm about to make a weird comparison, but you gotta bear with me here. You see, on my second watch, I realized that I have the same problem with Eternals that I had with Batman v Superman. And yes, I know these two movies have absolutely nothing in common, but they do share one major flaw. And that flaw is that Eternals, like Batman v Superman, is a movie that tries to shove an entire season's worth of television into 2.5 hours, and it just doesn't work. There's just way too much happening in this movie at the same time, and it makes it all feel very weird. I think Eternals is the perfect example of a movie that is too ambitious for its own good. It has like 4 or 5 subplots that kind of drag the movie down because while they're all interesting on paper, the movie just doesn't have enough time to flesh out those storylines to make them work properly. Jon Snow has this whole thing with his ancestry that puts his very identity back into question, but it's just completely glossed over with one line, and then he gets a post-credit scene that sets up his future in a way that feels completely random and unearned. Like, what is this sword? Where did he get it? What does it mean? Like, this post-credit sequence feels like it was following up on a scene that was cut out of the movie. It makes no sense. If it had been a TV show and that story had more time to be fleshed out correctly, maybe Jon Snow would have gotten a full storyline to investigate the mysterious past of his family. And I'm sure it would have been great, but that subplot, as is, just doesn't fit in this movie. Eternals tries to do so much, and it's weird because you would think that it would make it go by quickly because it has so much story. But despite being excessively overstuffed with storylines, the movie feels way longer than it actually is, and it gets a little boring at times. It really reminded me of how Batman v Superman tried to shove like 3 movies into one and just made it super bloated. It tried to be a Man of Steel sequel while being a Batman movie, introducing Wonder Woman, setting up the Justice League, having Lex going through all this stuff to create Doomsday. Like, it was just too much story and too many characters for a 2-hour movie. I got the exact same feeling when watching Eternals. It wants to be a story about the never-ending war between the Eternals and the Deviants, but it also wants to be an introspective story about life and its value. But also, it's a movie about the Celestials and the destruction of Earth. But also, it's a love story that transcends time. Like, dude, chill. Just Just write one movie, you don't have to write 7. And as a result, we not only end up with an excessive amount of characters that feel flat and are very difficult to care about, but also we end up with storylines that either go nowhere or lead to twists that are rendered completely useless to the overall story because the way it goes about revealing elements of the plot is just too messy. In Batman v Superman, it was the Lois Lane investigation that had absolutely no point in the end. A major part of the movie is dedicated to Lois investigating a bullet she got in Nairobi that made her feel suspicious about the violent state of the country. The whole point of that plot line was to eventually lead Lois and the audience to the twist that Lex Luthor has been orchestrating every single event in the movie since the very start. Lex is the one behind the war in Nairobi. He framed Superman for murder. He manipulated the Bat to go after Superman. And Lois figures it all out, but the other overlapping subplots kind of make it all unnecessary because in the movie, by the time Lois figures out everything was part of Lex's plan, we, the audience, have already known for like 20 minutes because it was revealed in another scene. So what was the point? The twist should have been revealed when Lois figured it out. We should have found out with her, not before her. Because even after we find out that Lex was behind it, we still have to watch her figure it out herself, but there's no tension in the storyline anymore because we already know. And it's the same with Eternals. Angelina Jolie's character, Thena, has a very interesting subplot in which her mental state is broken by what we're led to believe is a strange galactic disease that makes her go insane. Like she will suddenly become completely unstable and attempt to kill the Eternals, and she has to be under surveillance at all times because you never know when it's gonna hit her. Her super fragile mental state is like a big part of the movie, and it all leads to the audience discovering that the real purpose of the Eternals is not to make sure the civilization thrives, but instead to make sure a Celestial wakes up and destroys the planet along with its entire population, and that Thena is not actually crazy, but the Celestials had wiped the memories of the Eternals, and she actually remembers old memories of the Eternals doing the exact same thing to other planets millions of years ago and wanting to stop it. And that would have been great, except Thena is not the one who discovers that information. Sersi is, and Thena's entire subplot just goes nowhere. It doesn't have a real resolution. So what was the point? Thena should have been the one to figure it out. Having lost the only person who stuck with her for 6,000 years, she would have had all the necessary motivation to turn against the Celestials after discovering the truth. But for some reason, it just doesn't turn out that way, and it's weird because it feels like that's what the movie is setting up, and then it just doesn't happen. Another twist that comes out of nowhere is Ikaris suddenly turning into a fucking Terminator. Him becoming the villain of the movie like 20 minutes before it ends just didn't work for me. The idea of the conflict between the Eternals when it comes to their beliefs and what they believe is the right thing to do with existence itself could have been interesting. But unfortunately, a lot of it relies on their bond as a family, which I did not believe at all. At best, the Eternals feel like colleagues, co-workers. They never actually feel like a family who cares about each other above all else. They keep saying they do, but you never really see it. So Ikaris suddenly being like, I'm ready to kill all of you, just didn't have the impact they intended for it to have, because you didn't seem that close in the first place, man. And I also didn't care about any of these characters, so seeing them die was not a big deal to me. I think the scene where Ikaris flies his ass into the sun to commit suicide is supposed to be tragic, but it just comes off completely random, and everyone in the theater was just like, what? Is he dead? Isn't he immortal? What's happening? This movie just didn't have enough time to pull off all those storylines. And you can see that in the third act. The climax of Eternals doesn't make a lot of sense because it's trying to wrap up a bunch of plot lines that are not connected at all. The Deviants are completely unimportant to this story in the end, and by the time the final battle starts, there's only like one of them. His name is Crow, and he shows up in the middle of the climax out of nowhere to fight just whoever he finds, I guess? Like, what's his plan here? What's his ethos? He has absolutely no connection to the conflict of this battle, and so he just dies, and then there's no conclusion, there's no follow-up. Angelina Jolie just slashes him like a ninja, and then we never hear about Crow again. He's never mentioned. He's the villain this movie sets up from the beginning, and they give him a line where he talks about just wanting his species to survive because they see the Eternals as the bad guys, which could have been cool, but they never bring it up again. And then the movie just gets rid of him and moves on. Yo, hashtag justice for Crow, G. My man deserved better. Also, yes, I had to Google him to find out his name was Crow, because I don't think the movie ever tells us what his name is. He's just the deviant. His storyline was completely random. And he's not even the biggest victim. Some characters don't even have a storyline at all, because there's no time for it. Makari probably has the most badass speedster scene of all time during the final battle, but aside from that, anybody remembers anything she does in that movie? Can anyone tell me anything about her as a character? What about Gilgamesh? Or Druig? Anything? Yeah, I didn't think so. Sprite has an interesting theme that is just sort of mentioned in one scene. Sprite was designed by the Celestials to look like a child. She's millions of years old, but she doesn't age. She's forever trapped in the body of a kid. So she can't find love because nobody will ever be able to look at her in a romantic way. And in one scene, she goes to Ikaris and asks why he thinks the Celestials made her this way. Now, I know this context from the comics, but in the movie, it's introduced in that one line, and then it's never discussed again until the very end when Sersi randomly goes, "Hey, by the way, I can make you human now, and you can start aging like a normal person." And Sprite is just like, "Oh yeah, I'd like that." And then that's it. It's really weird. The movie feels like a massive amount of it was cut out, and there are holes in the story that just take away all of the depth. Because yeah, the thing about Eternals is that this movie is not as deep as it seems to think it is, and while it has a lot of interesting themes to explore, none of them have enough time to actually be looked at in a deeper way. I like the debate they have around their choice to save humanity. Do we save humanity and prevent millions of other life forms to exist, or do we let humanity die to allow these millions of life forms to exist? That's fascinating, especially for characters that are basically gods and question the very morality of their power. But it's all very hollow and surface level because we gotta get to the finale really quickly and wrap up the 17 storylines that have been overlapping the entire movie. Again, there's just too much happening in this movie at once. Even the ending is jarring. It's like this weird compilation of scenes that seem to only be here to set up a million other movies to come. And the reason why I bring all that up is because while I'm only talking about Eternals and Batman v Superman, this is an issue that is becoming more and more frequent in superhero movies. The desire to make big movies that set up other big movies is making the filmmakers get ahead of themselves, and the resulting product starts to be so overstuffed that it becomes hard to enjoy. Eternals fell victim to it, Batman v Superman fell victim to it, Suicide Squad, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Wonder Woman 1984, Justice League, and I'm not even gonna talk about the X-Men franchise, the kings of making movies that tease future movies that never actually end up happening.
Go fuck yourself.
Eternals to me feels like it should have been a 6 to 7 episode miniseries, where we could have had more time to properly establish real bonds between these characters so they can feel like more than co-workers. I'm not kidding, a lot of this movie relies on the romantic relationship between Sersi and Ikaris, but their romance is so bland. They barely have any chemistry, which is already a problem on its own, but it's also impossible to connect with them on that level because we don't know anything about them. Sersi is the main character out of this entire ensemble cast. She's the one at the center, and I cannot tell you a single thing about her. Not one. I think she's a teacher. That's about all I know. But for a character that is at the center of this larger-than-life story, literally, that affects the entirety of the universe, Sersi is surprisingly passive. She moves through the story from plot point to plot point, but she's just kind of there. She just exists in the story, but she contributes very little to it. She's more of a tourist than a protagonist. And Gemma Chan is one of my favorite actors working today. She's insanely insanely talented and she's good in the movie, but her character is just so bland and weirdly written. And it's not helped by the fact that this movie has horrible pacing. The first half of Eternals is full of flashbacks that show the characters living at different points in history, and they use that to try and build a relationship between Sersi and Ikaris, but it just doesn't work. There's never anything that justifies why they're in love. It's one of those romantic storylines that feel like it's only here because the plot needs it, but it feels weirdly unnatural. I don't understand why these two are so in love. This movie's fucking weird. And look, I swear I'm not trying to be an asshole here, I promise, but it's kind of mind-boggling to me. Because honestly, when I first saw Eternals, I came out of the theaters thinking it was fine. I was like, yeah, it's not the best MCU movie ever, not even close, and I feel a bit underwhelmed, but like, it was okay. But, like I said earlier, the more I think about this movie, the less I like it. I can't quite say that I hate it, I don't, because it has its moments. They're very few and far between, but they're here. They exist. And ultimately, I just hope the Eternals get fixed. I don't want to be pessimistic and just write them off, because there is a lot of potential with them. I might have mentioned that before, like on Instagram or something, but I am not a big fan of the Doctor Strange movie, and coming out of it, I didn't really give a shit about Doctor Strange as a character. I didn't like him all that much. But then he got to be way more fleshed out in other movies, and it fixed a lot of the problems I had with him. And now, I like Doctor Strange quite a lot, and I get really excited whenever he shows up. And I hope the Eternals get the same evolution in universe. I really enjoy the Eternals comics. I highly recommend the 2006 series by Neil Gaiman. It's absolutely incredible. And I do believe in the MCU's vision of the role they can play in the future. But this movie was not it, especially not as an introduction. I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be, but goddamn, this movie missed the mark on several levels. I'm actually curious to know what your thoughts are about this movie because it is so divisive. So, I don't know, let me know in the comments. Be cool, let's not yell at each other, let's not throw insults at each other, let's keep this fun and let's keep this a safe space, but yeah, you know, let me know where you fall on it. Do you like it? Do you hate it? What worked for you? What didn't work for you? I don't know, I just feel like a movie being this divisive, there has to be something in the middle that kind of sways people one way or another. So I'm genuinely curious. Let me know. But yeah, those were my weird thoughts on Eternals. I really hate that I was so disappointed in this movie. I really wanted to love it. So, you know, now let's just hope Spider-Man No Way Home lives up to the expectations. Holy shit, what if it sucks? Imagine this movie sucks. What do we do then? Tom Holland, if you fuck this up...